Nobody tells you this when you are young. The most dangerous thing that can happen to a human being is not failure. It is living the same year 20 times and calling it a life. That is how people disappear while still breathing, not in one dramatic moment, not in some cinematic collapse, but quietly. A little less curiosity every year, a little less ambition, a little more distraction, a little more comfort, a little more delay. Until one day they wake up older, exhausted, emotionally numb, staring at a version of life they never truly chose. And the terrifying part is this: most of them never even notice it happening. This audiobook is called Improve 1% Every Day, The Power of Growing Every Day. And over the next chapters, you are going to understand something that can completely reshape the direction of your future, not through motivation, not through unrealistic overnight transformation, not through pretending life is easy, but through something far more powerful: tiny daily growth. Growth so small that most people ignore it. Growth so quiet that nobody applauds it. Growth so ordinary that it almost looks meaningless in the moment. And yet, that is exactly where extraordinary lives come from. Because life does not change in giant explosions. It changes in repetitions. The repeated thoughts you allow. The repeated habits you tolerate. The repeated excuses you protect. The repeated disciplines you commit to. Your future is not created by intensity. It is created by consistency. That is the secret. A person who improves emotionally, mentally, financially, spiritually, physically, by even a tiny amount every single day eventually becomes unrecognizable from the person they used to be. And the reverse is also true. A person who neglects themselves by just a little every day slowly builds a life they no longer recognize. This audiobook is not here to impress you. It is here to interrupt you, to interrupt the unconscious patterns that have been quietly shaping your identity. Because most people are waiting for motivation while their life is being built by habit. Think about that carefully. A habit does not care about your intentions. It only cares about repetition. That means your future is being constructed right now by things that feel insignificant. The way you speak to yourself when nobody hears, the way you spend lonely evenings, the way you react when life disappoints you, the way you use one free hour, the way you recover after failure, the way you think during silence. Everything compounds. Everything. A single degree of change repeated long enough becomes an entirely different destination. That is why two people can start in the same place and end up living completely different realities 10 years later. Not because one got lucky, not because one was chosen, but because one kept growing while the other kept waiting. And maybe this is the moment you finally realize something painful. You have spent years waiting to become the person you could have been, waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel motivated, waiting for clarity, waiting for the perfect time. But life has never been waiting for you. The clock never pauses for uncertainty. Every day your habits are voting for the person you are becoming. Every single day, even now, especially now. There is a reason some people slowly become stronger, calmer, wiser, more focused, more disciplined, while others become more distracted, more bitter, more emotionally reactive, more exhausted. Daily direction, that is all. And here is the beautiful part. You do not need to change your entire life tonight. You only need to stop abandoning yourself today. That is where transformation begins. Quietly. In choices so small, the ego overlooks them. reading 10 pages instead of scrolling for an hour, taking a walk instead of feeding anxiety, sleeping earlier instead of escaping into midnight distractions, having one difficult conversation instead of avoiding it for months, saving a little money, learning one skill, writing one page, saying no one more time, staying calm one moment longer. Tiny victories. But tiny victories repeated daily become identity. And identity changes everything. Because once a person starts seeing themselves differently, they begin acting differently without force. That is real growth. Not temporary motivation, not emotional hype. Internal reconstruction. You know what destroys most people? They think success should feel dramatic. But the truth is, growth often feels painfully ordinary while it is happening. The gym feels ordinary. Studying feels ordinary. Practicing discipline feels ordinary. Healing feels ordinary. Waking up early feels ordinary. Choosing restraint feels ordinary. Until years later, when everyone calls you exceptional, they see the outcome. They never saw the repetitions. There is an invisible season every strong person goes through, a season where nothing looks impressive, no applause, no validation, no visible rewards, just quiet consistency. And most people quit there because human beings are addicted to visible progress. But life rewards invisible preparation first. A seed does not look powerful while buried underground, yet everything begins there. Maybe that is where you are right now, buried beneath disappointment, buried beneath self-doubt, buried beneath years of inconsistency, buried beneath exhaustion nobody fully understands. And maybe part of you wonders whether real change is still possible for you. It is, but not through self-hatred, not through punishing yourself, not through comparing yourself to strangers online, not through trying to become perfect overnight. Real growth begins the moment you stop trying to destroy who you are and start building who you could become, patiently, compassionately, relentlessly. There is a sentence you need to remember for the rest of your life. Small disciplines repeated with love become massive transformations over time. Not fear, not shame, not panic, love. Because people who hate themselves sabotage consistency. But people who genuinely begin respecting their future slowly build habits that protect it. That changes everything. And listen carefully. You are not behind in life because you failed. You are behind when you stop growing. That is the real danger. A human being can survive mistakes. A human being can survive heartbreak. A human being can survive embarrassment. A human being can survive starting over. But stagnation slowly kills the spirit. You can feel it when someone has stopped growing. Their eyes lose energy, their conversations repeat, their goals disappear, their hope becomes cynical humor, their curiosity dies quietly. Never let that happen to you. Never become emotionally asleep. Protect your ability to evolve. Because growth is not just about achievement, it is about aliveness. The people who continue growing remain emotionally alive. They remain mentally sharp. They remain adaptable. They remain hopeful. They remain dangerous to limitation. And in a world designed to distract you, numb you, and exhaust your attention, choosing daily growth becomes an act of rebellion, especially now. In 2026, people are drowning in stimulation, infinite scrolling, artificial urgency, comparison, notifications, noise, constant consumption. Most people cannot even sit alone with their thoughts for 10 minutes anymore. Their attention has been fractured into pieces, and fractured attention creates fragmented lives. That is why improving 1% every day is no longer just self-improvement. It is self-defense. Protecting your focus, protecting your mind, protecting your future, protecting your emotional energy. Because where attention goes, life follows. And if this message resonates with you, I genuinely want you to remember this moment years from now. The moment you stopped waiting for giant change and started respecting small progress. Sometimes a life changes because of one sentence heard at the right time. Maybe this is yours. An hour is never just an hour. A habit is never just a habit. A decision is never just a decision. Everything's becoming something. And over the next chapters, we are going deeper into the psychology of momentum, discipline, emotional resilience, focus, self-respect, identity, relationships, energy, and the compound effect of tiny actions repeated long enough to reshape an entire destiny. Because there is something most people never realize until it is too late. Your life is not built in the future, it is built in the ordinary days you keep underestimating. And tomorrow morning, when your alarm rings and the old version of you whispers, "Skip today," that will be the real beginning. Because the smallest choices are often standing between two completely different futures. And most people never notice the moment their life starts changing. At first, it just feels like another ordinary day, until one day, it doesn't. Dear friends, we've just started working on this channel, so we'd really appreciate your support. Please like the video and leave a few words in the comments. It'll really help us promote it. We'd be very grateful. Let's keep going. Chapter 2, The Invisible Architecture of Your Future. There are people living inside prisons they built themselves so slowly they never heard the walls being constructed. Not physical prisons, mental ones. A life shaped by automatic behavior, automatic thinking, automatic emotional reactions, automatic excuses. And the strange thing is, most of those people still believe they are free. They wake up at the same hour, think the same thoughts, consume the same distractions, complain about the same problems, repeat the same emotional cycles, year after year, without realizing that repetition eventually hardens into identity. That is why growth matters so much, because every small improvement weakens the walls. Every intentional decision reclaims a little freedom. This is the part nobody explains clearly enough. Your habits are not only creating results, they are creating you. Read that again in your mind. Your habits are creating you. The food you repeatedly eat shapes your energy. The media you repeatedly consume shapes your thinking. The conversations you repeatedly tolerate shape your standards. The thoughts you repeatedly entertain shape your emotional reality. You do not become your goals. You become your repeated systems. That is why people who chase motivation stay trapped. Motivation is emotional weather. Systems are architecture. And architecture decides whether a building survives storms. Think about the strongest people you know. The calmest person. The most disciplined person. The person who always seems emotionally grounded under pressure. What you are seeing is not personality. You are seeing accumulated habits. Years of emotional training. Years of repeated decisions. Years of small internal corrections nobody witnessed. Strength is usually built privately before it is displayed publicly. That is important to understand because modern culture has created a dangerous illusion. Everyone sees outcomes. Nobody sees repetitions. People see the fit body. They do not see the mornings the person almost stayed in bed. People see confidence. They do not see years of insecurity slowly confronted through uncomfortable action. People see financial success. They do not see the years of delayed gratification and invisible sacrifice. People see emotional maturity. They do not see the nights someone spent learning how not to react impulsively. The world celebrates visible success while ignoring invisible discipline. But invisible discipline is where life changes. Quietly, one decision at a time. You know what is fascinating? Most people ruin their future trying to feel good immediately. That single pattern destroys millions of lives. Immediate comfort instead of long-term peace. Immediate pleasure instead of long-term growth. Immediate distraction instead of long-term clarity. And because the consequences arrive slowly, people do not notice the damage until years later. That is how habits deceive you. The cost is delayed. A person does not become unhealthy after one bad meal. They become unhealthy through accumulated neglect. A relationship rarely collapses from one conversation. It collapses from repeated emotional disconnection. Financial stress rarely appears overnight. It grows through unconscious decisions repeated for years. Everything compounds. That is the terrifying truth. And it is also the hopeful truth. Because if negative patterns compound, positive ones do too. A few pages read daily become wisdom. A few dollars saved daily become stability. A few minutes of reflection daily become self-awareness. A few disciplined choices daily become self-respect. Most people underestimate tiny progress because they are addicted to dramatic evidence. But real transformation is often invisible for a long time, like roots growing underground before a tree ever appears. And this is where many people fail. They quit during the invisible season. They go to the gym for 2 weeks and stop because the mirror has not changed enough. They study for a month and stop because mastery has not arrived yet. They meditate for 10 days and stop because peace still feels distant. They mistake lack of visible results for lack of progress. But some of the most important changes in life happen internally before they become externally visible. Confidence begins invisibly. Discipline begins invisibly. Emotional resilience begins invisibly. Focus begins invisibly. Before the world sees growth, the nervous system feels it first. That matters. Because if you rely only on visible proof, you will abandon yourself too early. And unfortunately, many people already have. They tried once, failed once, became embarrassed once, lost momentum once, then quietly decided growth was not for them. But growth was never supposed to feel comfortable. A seed breaks before it becomes a tree. And human beings are not different. Every meaningful transformation requires some form of discomfort. The discomfort of honesty, the discomfort of discipline, the discomfort of patience, the discomfort of letting go, the discomfort of becoming unfamiliar to your old self. That last one is especially difficult because growth changes relationships, not always because people hate your progress. Sometimes because your growth reminds them of their stagnation. You will notice this eventually. The moment you begin becoming more intentional with your life, certain people become uncomfortable around you, not because you are judging them, but because discipline has a strange way of exposing denial. When you start waking up earlier, people call you obsessive. When you start protecting your peace, people call you distant. When you start focusing on growth, people call you selfish. Be careful whose opinions you build your future around, because some people only feel comfortable when you remain small enough to resemble the version of yourself they are familiar with. But growth requires courage, especially the courage to disappoint expectations. You cannot evolve while constantly trying to remain emotionally convenient for everybody. Sometimes, improving 1% every day means becoming willing to lose old versions of yourself, old habits, old environments, old emotional patterns, old identities. And that process feels lonely sometimes. No one talks enough about that part. Growth can feel isolating before it becomes liberating. Because while you are changing internally, the external world often remains the same for a while. You still wake up in the same room, still face the same bills, still carry certain fears, still feel uncertain sometimes. But internally, something begins shifting. Your standards rise, your awareness sharpens, your tolerance for self-betrayal decreases, and slowly your life starts reorganizing around the person you are becoming. That is why self-respect is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. Because once someone truly respects themselves, certain behaviors become impossible to continue comfortably. You cannot endlessly procrastinate while respecting your future. You cannot constantly lie while respecting your character. You cannot repeatedly destroy your health while respecting your body. Self-respect changes behavior naturally, and daily growth builds self-respect, not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. You know what creates confidence? Keeping promises to yourself. That is all. Confidence is not loudness, it is self-trust. And self-trust is built through evidence. When you say you will wake up earlier and actually do it. When you say you will finish something and follow through. When you say you will stay calm and manage your emotions better. Tiny evidence accumulates. Eventually, your mind begins believing you. That changes everything. Because many people secretly do not trust themselves anymore. Too many broken promises, too many delays, too many unfinished attempts. And every broken promise weakens identity. But the beautiful thing about identity is that it can be rebuilt, one honest action at a time, not through shame, not through self-hatred, through consistency. There is a man somewhere tonight, sitting alone in a car after work, wondering where his ambition went. There is a woman lying awake at 2 a.m. exhausted from carrying responsibilities nobody fully notices. There is a young person scrolling endlessly trying to escape the anxiety of feeling lost. There is someone listening right now, quietly afraid they have wasted too much time already. You are not alone in that feeling. Human beings everywhere are fighting invisible battles. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply deciding not to give up on yourself. Especially when life has not rewarded you yet. Especially when progress feels slow. Especially when nobody sees your effort. Because the truth is, your life can begin changing long before anybody else notices. That is how real transformation works. Internally first. Silently first. A person reads one more page, takes one more walk, controls one more emotional reaction, saves one more dollar, practices one more hour, gets up one more morning. And eventually momentum appears. That is the power of compounding. Tiny actions repeated consistently create outcomes that once felt impossible. If this chapter speaks to something deep inside you, I want you to remember one thing. You do not need to rebuild your entire life tonight. You only need to win today with slightly more awareness than yesterday. That is enough. 1%, just 1%. Because people dramatically overestimate what can happen in one day and completely underestimate what can happen in 5 years of consistency. 5 years of reading, 5 years of discipline, 5 years of emotional growth, 5 years of focused improvement. That changes an entire bloodline. And in the next chapter, we are going somewhere even deeper. Because improving your life is not only about adding better habits. Sometimes it begins with learning how to stop leaking energy into the things quietly destroying your focus, your peace, and your future. And most people have no idea how much of their life force is disappearing every single day. Chapter 3. The Quiet Thieves of Human Potential. The most dangerous distractions in life rarely look dangerous in the beginning. That is why they win. Nobody ruins their future on purpose. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "I want to waste my potential." Nobody consciously chooses mediocrity. Nobody dreams about becoming emotionally exhausted, disconnected, and numb. It happens gradually, a little distraction, a little avoidance, a little emotional escape repeated often enough that it becomes a lifestyle. And eventually people no longer recognize the difference between rest and avoidance. That is the real danger, because there is a difference between recovering and escaping. Recovery restores your energy. Escape drains it slowly, while pretending to comfort you. One heals, the other numbs. Modern life has mastered the art of keeping people emotionally numb. Infinite entertainment, infinite scrolling, infinite noise. People are overstimulated and underfulfilled at the same time. They consume more than any generation before them and still feel empty inside. Why? Because consumption is not growth. And many people have confused stimulation with progress. Watching productivity videos is not discipline. Talking about goals is not execution. Planning endlessly is not movement. Being busy is not the same as building. That distinction matters. A person can spend years feeling productive while secretly remaining stagnant. You see it everywhere now. People who know exactly what they should do, but still cannot seem to do it consistently. That is not an intelligence problem. It is an energy problem, a focus problem, an emotional regulation problem. Most people are not lacking information anymore. They are drowning in information. What they lack is internal order, because without internal order, even good intentions collapse under distraction. Look around carefully. Attention has become one of the most valuable resources on earth. Entire industries are competing for your focus every second. Notifications, algorithms, content engineered to hijack emotion, short-form stimulation designed to weaken patience, and the cost is becoming visible. People cannot concentrate deeply anymore, cannot sit quietly anymore, cannot tolerate boredom anymore, cannot commit long-term anymore. Everything must be instant, instant validation, instant pleasure, instant success, instant relief. But life does not reward instant gratification for very long. The strongest lives are built through delayed gratification, through restraint, through choosing what matters most over what feels good immediately. That is why improving 1% every day requires more than motivation. It requires protecting your attention like your future depends on it, because it does. Think about how many dreams quietly disappear, not from lack of talent, but from constant distraction. Books never written. Businesses never started. Relationships never healed. Skills never mastered. Potential never explored. Not because people were incapable, but because their attention was scattered across too many meaningless things. Scattered attention creates scattered lives. And unfortunately, distraction is seductive. because it feels harmless. 1 hour lost online does not seem dangerous. One late night does not seem destructive. One day of procrastination does not feel life-changing. But repetition changes everything. That is always the hidden truth. Repetition creates identity. You know what is tragic? Some people spend more time organizing their phone apps than organizing their mind. More time decorating their image than developing their character. More time consuming the lives of strangers than building their own. And slowly, they begin feeling disconnected from themselves. Not because they are weak, because they are overstimulated. There is a difference. An exhausted nervous system struggles to build consistency. That is why rest matters. Silence matters. Stillness matters. Not laziness. Recovery. Real recovery, the kind where you reconnect with your own thoughts again. Because if you never sit alone quietly, you eventually lose contact with yourself. And that creates a dangerous kind of emptiness. A life where someone looks successful externally, but internally feels fragmented. You see this often in high-performing people. Outward achievement, internal chaos, money, but no peace, attention, but no clarity, productivity, but no emotional stability. Why? Because growth in one area does not automatically heal neglect in another. That is why true self-improvement must remain holistic. Mind, body, emotions, relationships, purpose, discipline, rest. Everything connected. One neglected area eventually affects the others. A person cannot endlessly ignore emotional exhaustion and still perform at their highest level. A person cannot constantly consume negativity and expect mental clarity. A person cannot betray their own values repeatedly and still maintain inner peace. Everything leaks somewhere. Energy leaks through resentment, through unresolved anger, through comparison, through guilt, through endless distraction, through pretending to be okay when internally falling apart. And many people do not realize how exhausted they truly are because emotional exhaustion accumulates slowly, just like physical exhaustion. It builds quietly until one day motivation disappears, patience disappears, joy disappears. And the person thinks they are lazy, when in reality they are emotionally overloaded. This is why awareness matters so much. You cannot heal what you refuse to notice. Ask yourself honestly, what is draining your life force right now? Not theoretically, really. Is it constant comparison, negative environments, digital addiction, lack of sleep, unspoken resentment, fear of failure, fear of judgment, people-pleasing, avoidance? Something is always costing energy. And growth begins when awareness becomes stronger than denial. That is a difficult moment for many people because awareness removes excuses, but it also restores power. You know what emotionally mature people understand? Every yes costs something. Every commitment costs energy. Every distraction costs focus. Every environment shapes behavior. That is why boundaries become essential for growth, not walls. Boundaries. The ability to consciously decide what deserves access to your attention. And many people struggle with this because they confuse accessibility with kindness. You are not required to emotionally carry everyone. You are not required to answer every message immediately. You are not required to attend every event. You're not required to explain your growth to people committed to misunderstanding it. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is strategic, especially in a world constantly trying to fragment your focus. You know what successful people quietly become good at? Energy management, not just time management. Because exhausted people make reactive decisions. Emotionally overwhelmed people lose consistency. Mentally scattered people abandon long-term goals for short-term comfort. Energy changes behavior. That is why your environment matters more than most people realize. A distracted environment creates distracted thinking. If your room is chaotic, your mind often becomes chaotic. If your social circle normalizes excuses, discipline becomes harder. If your digital world constantly stimulates anxiety, inner calm becomes difficult. Environment is invisible psychology, and tiny changes in environment create huge behavioral differences over time. A clean workspace, a quieter evening routine, 1 hour without the phone, more sunlight, more reading, more movement, more silence. Tiny shifts. But tiny shifts repeated consistently alter emotional patterns. That is how real growth often happens, not through giant reinventions, through subtle corrections, like a plane adjusting 1 degree and eventually landing in a completely different country. You are always adjusting towards something. The question is whether you are doing it consciously, because unconscious living creates accidental futures. And too many people are drifting emotionally through life, hoping clarity magically arrives someday. But clarity usually comes from movement, from reflection, from discipline, from repeated honest action, not endless thinking. There is a moment that happens during genuine growth where you begin noticing things you once ignored. You notice how noise affects your mind. You notice how certain people drain your energy. You notice how late nights damage your focus. You notice how emotional chaos destroys momentum. Awareness sharpens. And at first that awareness can feel uncomfortable because growth ruins ignorance. You can no longer comfortably live in patterns you now recognize are hurting you. But that discomfort is a sign of evolution, not failure. And if you are listening to this right now feeling overwhelmed by how much needs changing, breathe for a moment. Do not turn this into self-judgment. That helps nobody. Remember what this audiobook is truly about. 1%. Tiny conscious improvements. Not perfection, not obsession, not becoming a machine. Becoming aligned. That is different. A human being who slowly aligns their habits with their values becomes powerful over time. Not instantly, but inevitably. And maybe tonight, your only 1% improvement is honesty. Honesty about what is draining you. Honesty about what you avoid. Honesty about what you truly want from life. That alone can begin changing everything, because awareness is where all transformation starts. And if this chapter resonates deeply with you, tell me privately in your own heart what distraction has stolen the most time from your life. Sometimes naming the thing honestly is the first step toward reclaiming your future. Because in the next chapter, we're going into something even deeper. The hidden emotional reasons so many people sabotage consistency right when their life is finally beginning to improve. And once you understand it, you will never look at procrastination the same way again. Dear viewer, we would really be grateful if you could share your ideas on how we can improve our videos in the comments. Thank you very much. Chapter 4. Why people destroy their own momentum. One of the strangest things about human beings is this. Many people are more afraid of becoming powerful than they are of remaining stuck. They will never say it out loud. Most are not even consciously aware of it. But watch closely what happens whenever their life finally begins improving. They start delaying again, start distracting themselves again, start doubting themselves again, start returning to habits they already promised to leave behind. Why? Because growth changes identity. And identity change feels psychologically dangerous to the nervous system. That is the hidden battle almost nobody talks about. Human beings become emotionally attached to familiarity, even when familiarity hurts them. A person can become attached to chaos, attached to struggle, attached to inconsistency, attached to emotional pain, not because they enjoy suffering, because suffering becomes predictable, and the nervous system values predictability more than happiness. That explains why some people sabotage relationships when they finally receive healthy love, why some people procrastinate when opportunities appear, why some people disappear emotionally right before success. The new version of life feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity triggers fear. This is why improving 1% every day is not just a physical process. It is psychological rewiring. You are teaching your nervous system how to live differently, slowly, patiently, safely. That matters. Because many people try to transform too aggressively and accidentally create internal resistance. They attempt to wake up one morning and become a completely different human being overnight. New routines, extreme discipline, perfect productivity, total reinvention. For a few days, they feel unstoppable. Then exhaustion arrives, overwhelm arrives, old habits return, and the person concludes they lack discipline. But often, the problem is not laziness. It is unsustainable self-violence. Real transformation is usually gentler than people expect. Consistent, intentional, adaptive, not frantic. You do not grow strongest by constantly attacking yourself. You grow strongest by building trust with yourself. That is a completely different mindset. Think about how you would guide someone you genuinely loved. You would challenge them, yes. Hold them accountable, yes. But you would not destroy them with shame every time they stumbled. Yet many people speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to another human being. Constant criticism, constant comparison, constant disappointment. And then they wonder why growth feels emotionally exhausting. A mind constantly under attack struggles to sustain momentum. That is why emotional intelligence matters deeply in self-improvement. Not just discipline, awareness, compassion, patience. Because sustainable growth requires emotional stability. And emotional stability comes from learning how to regulate yourself instead of constantly punishing yourself. There is a huge difference between accountability and self-hatred. Accountability says, I need to improve. Self-hatred says, I am worthless unless I improve immediately. One creates growth. The other creates burnout. Many high achievers secretly suffer because they build their entire identity around performance. They believe rest equals weakness. Mistakes equal failure. Slowing down equals losing value. So they become productive externally while emotionally collapsing internally. That is not success. That is survival disguised as ambition. True growth includes peace, not permanent anxiety. Yes, discipline matters. Yes, consistency matters. Yes, effort matters deeply. But your nervous system also matters. Your emotional health matters. Because if success destroys your inner life, eventually it stops feeling like success at all. You see this often now. People chasing goals they no longer emotionally connect with. People building lives that look impressive online but feel empty privately. Why? Because they forgot something important. Growth without alignment eventually creates emotional disconnection. That is why you must ask yourself difficult questions sometimes. Why do I want this goal? Who am I trying to impress? What kind of life actually feels meaningful to me? What kind of human being do I want to become emotionally? Those questions matter more than people realize, because external success without internal clarity becomes dangerous. You can spend years climbing a mountain only to realize you never wanted to be there. And that realization hurts, especially after sacrificing so much energy. That is why daily growth should not only make you more productive, it should make you more conscious, more emotionally honest, more self-aware, more intentional. Otherwise, you risk becoming efficient at building a life that does not truly fulfill you. And fulfillment matters. Not temporary pleasure, not shallow entertainment. Fulfillment. The feeling that your life is connected to something meaningful. You know what gives human beings meaning? Progress, not perfection. Progress. The feeling that your life is moving somewhere instead of emotionally standing still. That is why stagnation feels so painful psychologically. A human being can tolerate difficulty when they feel growth. But meaningless repetition slowly destroys hope. And unfortunately, many people live trapped inside cycles they no longer even question. Wake up tired, work exhausted, escape through distraction, sleep emotionally numb, repeat. Years pass that way. Dreams slowly shrink to fit survival. That is why awareness is revolutionary. The moment someone becomes fully conscious of their patterns, change becomes possible. Painful sometimes, but possible. There is a quiet moment that happens during real growth where you suddenly realize, my habits are not random anymore. You begin seeing the connection between your actions and your emotional state. You notice how sleep affects discipline, how food affects focus, how comparison affects self-worth, how environments affect ambition, how conversations affect mindset. Life becomes less accidental. And that awareness gives you power, not control over everything, but influence over yourself. And influence over yourself changes your future dramatically. Most people underestimate how powerful emotional momentum really is. One disciplined day creates psychological evidence. That evidence increases confidence. Confidence increases action. Action creates more evidence. Momentum builds identity. The reverse is also true. One avoided responsibility creates guilt. Guilt weakens motivation. Weak motivation increases avoidance. Negative momentum forms. That is why the first small action matters so much. Not because it changes everything immediately, because it interrupts emotional stagnation. A single walk can interrupt a depressive spiral. A single honest conversation can interrupt emotional distance. A single productive hour can interrupt months of avoidance. Tiny actions are psychologically powerful because they signal movement, and movement restores hope. That is why the phrase, just start, matters so much psychologically. Action reduces fear faster than thinking ever will. Many people are trapped not because they lack ability, but because they overthink themselves into paralysis. Waiting to feel certain, waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel guaranteed success. But certainty rarely comes first. Movement comes first. Then clarity follows. Think about learning to walk as a child. You did not wait until mastery appeared before taking a step. You fell repeatedly, adjusted repeatedly, learned gradually. Growth has always worked that way, but adults forget. They become embarrassed by imperfection, ashamed of learning, terrified of looking inexperienced, so they avoid beginning entirely. And avoidance quietly becomes identity. That is why humility becomes essential for growth. The willingness to be bad before becoming good, the willingness to learn slowly, the willingness to improve publicly sometimes. Ego hates that process, but life rewards it. And maybe this chapter is touching something you have felt for a long time without fully understanding. Maybe part of your inconsistency has never been laziness. Maybe part of it has been fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of change, fear of becoming responsible for your potential. Because once you truly realize what you are capable of, excuses become harder to hide behind. That can feel overwhelming. But listen carefully. You do not need to conquer your entire future tonight. You only need enough courage to continue. One step, one decision, one honest effort at a time. That is how human beings rebuild themselves. Quietly, slowly, repeatedly. And if these words resonate with something deep inside you, remember this line. A person does not transform because life suddenly becomes easier. A person transforms because they become more honest about the life they truly want. That honesty changes behavior. And in the next chapter, we are going into one of the most life-changing principles of all, the hidden relationship between pain and growth. Because the very discomfort you keep trying to avoid may actually be the doorway to the strongest version of yourself. Chapter 5. The pain you keep avoiding is training your future. There is a version of you that only appears after discomfort, not before it, not around it, through it. That is one of the hardest truths for people to accept, because human beings naturally move toward comfort, toward certainty, toward ease, toward safety. But growth rarely lives there for very long. Strength is usually born in resistance, not meaningless suffering, not glorifying pain, but necessary discomfort. The discomfort of discipline, the discomfort of honesty, the discomfort of patience, the discomfort of confronting yourself without distractions. Most people spend years trying to escape discomfort without realizing they are also escaping transformation. Think about how often people abandon things simply because they become emotionally uncomfortable. A difficult conversation, a new skill, a healthier routine, a business idea, a relationship worth repairing, a dream worth pursuing. The moment discomfort appears, they interpret it as a sign to stop. But discomfort is often evidence that growth has begun. That changes everything once you understand it, because suddenly you stop seeing all struggle as failure. You start asking a different question, not, how do I avoid discomfort, but which discomfort is worth enduring? That is a mature question, because every meaningful life requires some form of discomfort anyway. The discomfort of discipline or the discomfort of regret, the discomfort of honesty or the discomfort of self-deception, the discomfort of growth or the discomfort of stagnation. Choose carefully. One of the saddest realizations in adulthood is understanding how much pain comes from avoidance. People avoid difficult conversations for years and slowly lose relationships that could have been healed. People avoid confronting finances and quietly build years of stress. People avoid taking care of their body until health forces the issue. People avoid confronting loneliness by drowning themselves in distraction. Avoidance feels safe temporarily, but delayed pain usually grows heavier. That is why courage matters so deeply. Not loud courage, quiet courage. The courage to face reality directly, to sit alone and admit, this cannot continue. That moment changes lives, not dramatically at first, internally. Because awareness combined with honesty creates emotional momentum. And momentum is powerful. You know what many people misunderstand about discipline? They think disciplined people suffer less. Often disciplined people simply choose their suffering consciously. They choose temporary discomfort to prevent long-term pain. Waking up early is uncomfortable, but living without purpose becomes more painful. Exercise is uncomfortable, but losing your health becomes more painful. Studying is uncomfortable, but remaining stuck becomes more painful. Saving money is uncomfortable, but constant financial anxiety becomes more painful. Every life contains discomfort. Wise people choose the discomfort that builds freedom. And here's something else nobody says enough. Pain itself is not always destructive. Meaningless pain destroys people. Meaningful pain develops them. A mother sacrificing sleep for her child experiences meaningful pain. An athlete training for years experiences meaningful pain. A person healing emotionally after heartbreak experiences meaningful pain. Pain connected to purpose transforms differently. That is why purpose matters so much psychologically. Without purpose, discomfort feels unbearable. With purpose, discomfort becomes tolerable because it leads somewhere meaningful. This is why people can survive incredible hardship when they believe their suffering has meaning. Human beings are remarkably resilient when pain serves growth. But modern culture often teaches the opposite. It teaches emotional avoidance. Escape immediately, numb immediately, distract immediately. Feel nothing deeply for too long, and yet numbed people rarely build extraordinary lives. Because emotional numbness blocks both pain and passion. You cannot selectively numb emotions forever. If you numb fear constantly, you eventually numb excitement too. If you numb sadness constantly, joy becomes harder to feel deeply. That is why emotional awareness matters, not emotional suppression. Strong people are not emotionless. They simply learn not to become controlled by emotion. There is a difference. A disciplined person still feels tired, still feels doubt, still feels fear, still feels emotional resistance. They just do not allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent decisions. That distinction changes lives because many people are waiting to feel like it before taking action. But emotionally mature people understand something important. Feelings are temporary weather. Values are direction. You do not need perfect emotional conditions to move forward. You need commitment. That is all. Some days growth feels inspiring. Other days it feels repetitive. Other days it feels exhausting. Continue anyway, not aggressively, not obsessively, steadily, like water carving stone. One of the most powerful shifts you will ever experience is the moment you stop asking, "How fast can I change my life?" and start asking, "How consistently can I honor the future I want?" That question creates a completely different mindset because now growth becomes identity-based instead of emotionally reactive. You no longer exercise only when motivated. You exercise because you are becoming someone who respects their body. You no longer read only when inspired. You read because you are becoming someone who sharpens their mind. You no longer protect your peace only when convenient. You protect it because emotional stability matters to the life you are building. Identity changes behavior more deeply than motivation ever will. And identity is built through repeated evidence. Tiny evidence, again and again. That is why small promises matter so much. People underestimate the emotional importance of following through on little things. Making the bed, taking the walk, finishing the task, keeping your word, arriving on time, closing the laptop when you said you would. Tiny actions teach the nervous system, I can trust myself, and self-trust changes everything. Because once a person begins trusting themselves again, fear loses some of its control. Confidence grows quietly, not arrogance. Grounded confidence, the kind built through evidence instead of performance. You know what creates inner peace for many people? Alignment. When your actions stop constantly contradicting your values. That is why self-betrayal feels so emotionally exhausting. Saying health matters while neglecting your body. Saying family matters while never being emotionally present. Saying growth matters while endlessly procrastinating. Internal contradiction drains energy. Alignment restores it. And alignment usually begins with tiny corrections. One better decision today. One calmer reaction today. One honest conversation today. One disciplined hour today. That is enough. You do not need to become perfect this month. You need sustainable momentum. There is a man somewhere listening to this while driving home from a job he secretly hates, wondering whether it is too late to rebuild his future. There is a woman exhausted from carrying responsibilities silently for years, wondering whether she still has energy left for her own dreams. There is a young person terrified they are falling behind because social media has distorted their perception of progress. Listen carefully. You are not late. You are simply carrying accumulated emotional weight, and weight can be released gradually, one decision at a time. Do not let comparison poison your relationship with growth. Someone else's timeline is not your destiny. The internet has created a dangerous illusion that everyone else is advancing faster. But remember this, people post highlights, not confusion, not loneliness, not years of invisible rebuilding. Many people appearing successful externally are emotionally lost internally. Never envy appearances blindly. Real success includes peace. Real success includes emotional stability, meaningful relationships, self-respect, purpose, health, integrity, not just image. And perhaps one of the most powerful things you can do for your future is learning how to endure temporary discomfort without panicking emotionally. Because panic destroys consistency. Growth requires emotional steadiness. The ability to continue despite uncertainty. To continue despite slow progress. To continue despite imperfection. That is rare now, and rarity creates value. Most people quit too early, react too quickly, escape too often. Becoming someone who can remain steady during discomfort immediately separates you from the majority. Not because you are superior, because resilience has become uncommon. If this chapter speaks to something you have been feeling privately, I want you to remember this sentence. The life you want often hides behind the discomfort you keep avoiding. Think deeply about that. Because in the next chapter, we are entering one of the most transformative shifts of all. How tiny daily disciplines eventually reshape identity itself. And once identity changes, your entire relationship with life begins changing with it. We're so glad you decided to watch our video. We're also really curious to know which cities around the world are watching our videos. Could you let us know which city, or at least which country, you're from? We always read every comment under our videos carefully. Thank you. Chapter 6. Becoming the person your future needs. Every action you repeat is casting a vote for a future version of yourself. That means identity is never built in one dramatic moment. It is built quietly, through repetition, through mornings nobody applauds, through decisions nobody notices, through private moments where you either honor your future or betray it. This is where life becomes deeply personal, because eventually every human being reaches a moment where excuses stop feeling comforting and start feeling exhausting. A moment where distraction no longer fully numbs the emptiness. A moment where potential becomes impossible to ignore. A moment where the pain of remaining the same finally outweighs the fear of change. That moment changes people, not instantly on the outside, but internally something shifts. A person begins taking themselves seriously, and that is one of the most powerful transformations a human being can experience. You can feel the difference immediately when someone starts respecting their own life. Their energy changes, their standards change, their focus changes. Not because life suddenly became easier, because identity started evolving. Identity is everything. A person who sees themselves as careless behaves differently from someone who sees themselves as disciplined. A person who sees themselves as powerless behaves differently from someone who sees themselves as capable. That is why your internal language matters so much. The way you speak to yourself becomes emotional architecture. Some people unknowingly spend years rehearsing weakness internally. I always quit. I'm not consistent. I'll never change. I'm too late. I'm not disciplined enough. Be careful. Repeated thoughts become beliefs. Repeated beliefs become behavior. Repeated behavior becomes identity. And identity eventually shapes destiny. This is why tiny daily disciplines matter more than dramatic emotional promises. Because every disciplined action provides evidence. Evidence changes self-perception. When you wake up early consistently, your mind starts seeing you differently. When you keep your word consistently, self-trust grows. When you practice emotional control consistently, confidence stabilizes. Not fake confidence, not loud confidence, grounded confidence. The kind nobody can easily take away because it was earned internally. There is a hidden psychological shift that happens during long-term growth. At first, discipline feels forced. Then eventually, it begins feeling natural, not always easy, but aligned, like becoming fluent in a new language after years of practice. At first, every action requires conscious effort. Eventually, identity carries some of the weight. That is why patience matters so deeply. You are not only building results, you are building a nervous system capable of sustaining those results. And that takes time. A person can force temporary productivity through pressure. But lasting transformation usually requires internal integration. Slow adaptation. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They become obsessed with outcomes while ignoring identity. Lose the weight quickly, make money quickly, become successful quickly. But if identity remains unchanged, old patterns quietly return. Because identity always pulls behavior back toward what feels familiar. That is why someone can achieve external success and still internally feel like the old version of themselves. Real growth changes self-concept. You begin saying things differently internally, not with arrogance, with certainty. I am someone who finishes. I am someone who grows. I am someone who protects my peace. I am someone who learns. I am someone who handles discomfort. Those internal shifts matter more than people realize, because eventually your standards stop feeling like punishment and start feeling like self-respect. That changes the emotional experience of discipline completely. You no longer wake up early because you hate yourself into productivity. You wake up early because your future matters to you. You no longer exercise because you are ashamed of your body. You exercise because your body deserves strength and care. You no longer avoid distraction because someone online told you to. You avoid distraction because clarity has become valuable to you. Identity transforms behavior from forced to meaningful, and meaningful discipline lasts longer. There is a quiet sadness many adults carry privately, the sadness of becoming disconnected from who they once hoped to become. You can hear it sometimes in exhausted conversations. People joking about dreams they abandoned, laughing about goals they stopped believing in, pretending not to care anymore because disappointment became too painful. That sadness is heavier than failure, because failure still contains movement. Abandonment contains surrender. Never fully surrender on yourself. Adjust, rest, heal. Slow down if necessary, but do not emotionally abandon your own potential, because human beings are remarkably adaptive, more than they realize. A person can rebuild confidence, rebuild health, rebuild discipline, rebuild purpose, rebuild emotional stability, not overnight, but gradually, one honest day at a time. And maybe that is what you need to hear right now. Your life is not ruined because progress has been inconsistent. You are still becoming. As long as you continue growing, your story remains unfinished. That matters, especially during difficult seasons, because growth rarely feels linear while living through it. Sometimes progress looks like momentum. Sometimes progress looks like survival. Sometimes progress looks like resting without giving up. Do not compare your healing to somebody else's highlight reel. Real growth includes setbacks. It includes confusion, loneliness, emotional fatigue, moments of doubt. But resilient people continue returning to themselves again and again. That return matters. You know what makes someone emotionally dangerous in the best possible way? The ability to begin again without self-destruction. Most people collapse emotionally after inconsistency. One missed workout becomes 2 months. One mistake becomes shame. One setback becomes identity. But emotionally resilient people recover faster because they do not turn every stumble into a personal condemnation. They understand something important. Consistency is not perfection. Consistency is returning again and again and again. That mindset changes everything long term. Because life will interrupt you sometimes. There will be exhausting weeks, unexpected losses, emotional seasons where motivation disappears completely. The question is not whether you will struggle. The question is whether you will reconnect with your direction afterward. That is what separates temporary emotion from lasting identity. A person committed to growth eventually returns to growth, even after difficult seasons. And perhaps one of the most powerful realizations in adulthood is understanding that discipline is actually a form of self-love, not punishment. Protection. Protecting your future from your temporary impulses. Protecting your peace from chaos. Protecting your goals from emotional inconsistency. The world often portrays discipline as harshness, but true discipline creates freedom. Financial freedom, emotional freedom, mental clarity, physical strength, self-respect. Without discipline, human beings become vulnerable to every temporary emotion. And temporary emotions make dangerous long-term decisions. One emotional impulse can destroy years of progress if left unmanaged. That is why emotional maturity becomes so important. The ability to pause before reacting, to think before speaking, to breathe before exploding emotionally, to stay grounded under pressure. Those skills quietly shape entire destinies. Relationships survive because of emotional regulation. Careers survive because of emotional regulation. Dreams survive because of emotional regulation. And emotional regulation is trained daily. Tiny moments, one calmer response, one paused reaction, one less impulsive decision. Tiny emotional victories compound too. Everything compounds. That truth appears everywhere once you start noticing it. The books you read compound. The people around you compound. The habits you repeat compound. The emotions you rehearse compound. Life is accumulation. That is why ordinary days matter so much. Most of your future is being built during normal Tuesdays nobody will ever remember, not during dramatic breakthroughs. That realization should not depress you. It should empower you, because it means transformation is accessible daily. Not someday, today, right now. One better decision, one more conscious action, one more moment of awareness. And if this chapter resonates with you, I want you to think about something honestly tonight. What kind of person are your current habits quietly creating? Not the person you hope to become, not the version you describe to others. The version your repeated actions are actually building. That answer matters. Because in the next chapter, we are going somewhere most people avoid their entire life. Into the hidden relationship between loneliness, focus, and self-discovery. And why some of the most important growth in your life will happen in seasons where almost nobody fully understands you. Chapter 7. The seasons where nobody understands you. Some of the most important chapters of your life will look unimpressive from the outside. No applause, no visible success, no dramatic breakthrough, just you quietly rebuilding yourself while the world assumes nothing is happening. That season breaks many people emotionally because human beings naturally crave recognition. We want reassurance. We want proof that our effort matters. We want someone to notice the sacrifices. But growth often begins in invisibility. That is why loneliness becomes part of transformation sometimes. Not permanent loneliness, necessary separation. A season where your old environment no longer fits, but your future has not fully arrived yet. That space feels strange. You start thinking differently, protecting your energy differently, questioning old habits, losing interest in conversations that once consumed your attention. And suddenly, certain relationships begin feeling emotionally distant. Not because you became arrogant, because awareness changed your standards. Growth changes what feels normal. The things that once entertained you no longer satisfy you the same way. The chaos that once felt exciting now feels draining. The constant noise begins feeling exhausting instead of stimulating. And people around you may not fully understand the shift happening internally. That can feel isolating, especially when you are improving quietly, because silent growth confuses people. The world understands dramatic collapse better than subtle evolution. People notice when someone falls apart. They rarely notice when someone slowly becomes wiser. But wisdom often develops quietly. Late-night reflection, difficult self-conversations, learning how to sit with discomfort, learning how to stop abandoning yourself emotionally. Those moments rarely look impressive publicly, yet they shape everything. There is a reason solitude has transformed so many human beings throughout history, because solitude removes noise, and when noise disappears, truth becomes harder to avoid. You finally hear your own thoughts clearly, your fears clearly, your desires clearly. That can feel uncomfortable at first. Many people use constant stimulation because silence reveals things they have been avoiding: unprocessed emotions, unhealed wounds, disappointment, loneliness, fear. But silence also reveals possibility, clarity, direction, purpose, self-awareness. That is why solitude can either heal a person or terrify them depending on what they are willing to face internally. And maybe this is something you are experiencing now. You still show up for responsibilities, still function externally, but internally you feel yourself changing, outgrowing certain patterns, questioning certain environments, wanting deeper meaning from life. That feeling is important. Do not ignore it. Many people spend years betraying their own evolution because they are afraid of becoming different from the people around them. But growth requires difference. You cannot evolve while desperately trying to remain identical to the version of yourself that kept suffering. That version got you here, not there. Sometimes growth means becoming less emotionally available for chaos, less interested in gossip, less willing to tolerate disrespect, less addicted to external validation. And unfortunately, not everyone celebrates those changes, because your growth changes relationship dynamics. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist your new standards. People comfortable with your self-doubt may feel uncomfortable with your confidence. People emotionally attached to your old identity may struggle when you evolve. That does not make them evil. It makes them human. Change disrupts familiarity, and familiarity feels emotionally safe to people even when it limits them. This is why emotionally strong people eventually learn an important skill: the ability to continue growing without needing universal understanding. That is maturity. Not everyone will understand your season of rebuilding. Not everyone will understand your discipline. Not everyone will understand your silence. Continue anyway, because the strongest transformations are often deeply personal. You know what many successful people secretly have in common? They spent long periods building privately while appearing ordinary publicly. That is how mastery develops. Quietly. A musician practicing scales nobody hears. An athlete training before sunrise. A writer producing pages nobody reads yet. A parent sacrificing comfort to build a better future for their children. Invisible effort. The world celebrates outcomes while ignoring the invisible years that created them. But those invisible years matter most. That is where character forms, not during applause, during repetition, and perhaps this is why so many people never fully discover their potential. They cannot tolerate the invisible phase long enough. They need immediate recognition, immediate results, immediate proof. But life rarely works that way. The seed grows underground first. Remember that whenever your progress feels invisible, especially during lonely seasons, because loneliness is not always punishment. Sometimes loneliness is preparation, a season where distractions fall away so identity can strengthen, a season where you learn whether your dreams matter enough without constant validation. And validation addiction is dangerous, because if your motivation depends entirely on praise, criticism will destroy your consistency. That is why internal validation matters so much. The ability to respect your effort before the world applauds it. That changes everything psychologically. You stop needing everyone to believe in your vision immediately. You stop explaining yourself constantly. You stop performing growth for attention, and instead you begin focusing on substance, real work, real healing, real discipline, quietly. There is a phrase worth remembering. Protect your roots before displaying your branches. In other words, strengthen internally before seeking external attention. Because attention too early can weaken growth. People start talking instead of building, performing instead of improving, chasing image instead of substance. And eventually, the pressure of maintaining appearances crushes authenticity. You see this often now. People curating lives online while privately struggling emotionally. People appearing successful but internally exhausted. People constantly visible but deeply disconnected from themselves. Never confuse visibility with fulfillment. Some of the happiest people live quietly, grow quietly, love quietly, build quietly. Peace rarely needs an audience. That does not mean hiding your light forever. It means understanding timing. A tree does not force fruit before roots strengthen. And human beings are not different. Maybe right now your roots are strengthening. Maybe this season feels lonely because life is stripping distractions away from you. Maybe your growth is becoming more internal than external for a while. That is okay. Some of the most life-changing seasons feel confusing while living through them. Because transformation is rarely linear. You outgrow things emotionally before your external reality fully changes. That gap can feel frustrating. You start seeing differently before life visibly reflects it. You start thinking differently before circumstances catch up. You start valuing peace before your environment becomes peaceful. But internal change always comes first. That is how sustainable transformation works. Inside first, outside later. Trust the process enough to continue, not blindly, consciously, 1% at a time. And if these words resonate with you tonight, I want you to remember something carefully. The people who changed the most were often misunderstood during the process, not because they were wrong, because growth looks strange before results appear. Do not let temporary misunderstanding stop permanent transformation, especially not now. Because in the next chapter, we are going into one of the deepest truths about self-improvement, why emotional control may matter even more than talent, intelligence, or motivation in determining the quality of your future. And once you truly understand emotional mastery, you begin seeing life completely differently. If you like this audiobook, please give it a like. It will really help us promote the video. Chapter 8. The people who control their emotions control their future. A person who cannot control their emotions will eventually destroy things they spent years trying to build. Relationships, opportunities, health, reputation, peace. Not always through dramatic collapse. Sometimes through small repeated reactions, impulsive words, uncontrolled anger, constant anxiety, emotional avoidance, bitterness left unhealed. Most people spend years trying to improve their life externally while completely neglecting emotional mastery internally. And eventually, the internal chaos leaks into everything. That is why emotional control is not weakness. It is power. Real power. The ability to remain steady when life becomes uncertain. The ability to respond instead of react. The ability to pause before emotion takes control of direction. That changes entire destinies. You know what destroys many talented people? Not lack of skill. Emotional inconsistency. They sabotage opportunities when stressed, push people away when hurt, quit when discouraged, explode when frustrated, collapse when results arrive slower than expected, Talent without emotional regulation becomes unstable. But emotionally grounded people continue moving even during difficult seasons. That is rare, especially now. Modern life trains emotional impulsiveness, instant reactions, instant outrage, instant opinions, instant emotional discharge. People feel something and immediately act on it. But emotionally mature people understand something important. Not every emotion deserves immediate expression. Some emotions need reflection first. Some need patience. Some need silence before response. That is wisdom, and wisdom protects lives. Think about how many relationships collapse because people react emotionally instead of communicating consciously. One impulsive message, one uncontrolled argument, one moment of ego, one inability to regulate pain, years of connection damaged in minutes. Emotional discipline matters, not because emotions are bad, because emotions are powerful, and powerful things require responsibility. There is a massive difference between feeling emotion and becoming controlled by it. Strong people still feel anger, still feel sadness, still feel fear, still feel disappointment. They simply learn not to surrender their entire identity to temporary emotional states. That takes practice, daily practice, one calmer response at a time. And perhaps this is one of the most important growth areas in modern life because emotional overstimulation is everywhere now. People are mentally exhausted, sleep-deprived, constantly consuming information, constantly comparing themselves, constantly reacting to noise. A nervous system under constant stimulation struggles to remain emotionally balanced. That is why peace has become such a valuable form of wealth. Not luxury, peace. The ability to think clearly, sleep deeply, respond calmly, exist without constant internal chaos. Many people chase success while secretly craving peace more than anything else. Because eventually, human beings realize something. A restless mind ruins beautiful things. You can have money and still feel anxious, achievement and still feel empty, attention and still feel lonely. Without emotional stability, external success often fails to satisfy deeply. This is why self-awareness becomes essential. You must learn your emotional patterns honestly. What triggers you? What drains you? What environments affect your nervous system negatively? What conversations leave you emotionally exhausted? What habits make you emotionally unstable? Those questions matter deeply because emotional patterns repeated long enough become personality traits. Anxious reactions repeated daily become anxious living. Angry reactions repeated daily become bitterness. Avoidance repeated daily becomes emotional paralysis. Everything compounds emotionally too, and many people never realize how much their emotional state shapes their future. A person constantly overwhelmed emotionally struggles to remain disciplined consistently. A person constantly reacting impulsively struggles to build stable relationships. A person constantly seeking validation struggles to hear their own intuition. That is why emotional mastery creates freedom, not emotional suppression. Mastery, the ability to experience emotion without becoming enslaved by it. There is a moment that happens during real emotional growth where you stop asking, "How do I avoid difficult emotions?" and begin asking, "How do I move through them consciously?" That shift changes lives because life will always contain emotional difficulty, loss, uncertainty, disappointment, rejection, failure, loneliness. No amount of success removes human vulnerability completely, but emotionally resilient people process pain differently. They do not deny it. They do not become consumed by it. They move through it patiently. And one of the most powerful skills you can develop is learning how to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. That sounds simple. It is not. Most people panic emotionally the moment discomfort appears. They distract themselves immediately, scroll immediately, eat immediately, react immediately, numb immediately. But healing often requires staying present long enough to understand what you actually feel. Otherwise, emotions stay trapped beneath the surface and quietly shape behavior from the shadows. Unprocessed pain always leaks somewhere, into relationships, into self-sabotage, into anxiety, into exhaustion, into anger that appears unrelated on the surface. That is why emotional honesty matters. And emotional honesty requires courage. The courage to admit, I'm exhausted, I'm hurting, I'm afraid, I'm lost, I need to change. There is strength in that honesty, not weakness. Weakness is pretending forever. Strong people confront reality directly, especially internal reality, and listen carefully. You do not need to become emotionally perfect. No human being is emotionally perfect. You simply need increasing awareness, increasing responsibility, increasing ability to pause before reacting destructively. That alone changes relationships dramatically. Imagine how different the world would feel if more people learned emotional regulation. Fewer impulsive arguments, fewer ego battles, fewer words spoken from temporary anger, fewer relationships destroyed because neither person knew how to communicate pain maturely. Emotional maturity is rare now, which is exactly why it is valuable. People remember calm energy in chaotic times. They remember grounded presence. They remember emotional safety. A person who can remain emotionally steady during difficulty becomes deeply trustworthy. And trust changes everything in life, in leadership, in friendships, in love, in family. You know what emotionally intelligent people eventually realize? Not every battle deserves energy. Some arguments are distractions. Some environments are poison. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you no matter how calmly you explain yourself. The kind that says, I am still becoming. I do not need to destroy myself to grow. That sentence alone can change lives, because people who learn to work with themselves instead of constantly against themselves sustain growth far longer. They recover faster, adapt faster, heal faster. Self-hatred burns energy. Self-respect preserves it. That distinction matters more than most people realize. And if this chapter resonates deeply with you, maybe take a quiet moment tonight without distractions and ask yourself honestly, what kind of relationship do I truly have with myself? Not the answer you give other people, the real answer, because the quality of that relationship quietly shapes every other area of your life. And in the next chapter, we are entering one of the most powerful shifts of all: how to become mentally stronger in a world designed to weaken focus, patience, and emotional resilience. Because mental strength is no longer optional, it has become survival.